commented before that you could make anonymous questions directly, if like addressing Alex, but Alex is not in a very easy place to find. So there is now a basket at the end of the rows of the chairs where you can just write your question and leave it there in case you want to make an anonymous questions. These questions will be read after the panel. And the second panel is on institutional boundaries and examines the responsibilities of museums, galleries, and cultural institutions in navigating censorship challenges. We will hear how financial support from private and governmental bodies can influence the artist's autonomy and how power dynamics generally shape the artistic expressions. So for this panel, we will have Hanna Kosonen, the Secretary General at Forum Artis, to moderate and give some words. Welcome to the stage. Welcome. And I hope you enjoy it. Yes.
Thank you very much for invitation. It's very, very nice to be here. And I will start with a self-description for those who are visually impaired and as a gesture of inclusion. I'm nearly 60 years old, female, white, blonde hair, and quite tall. So I was asked to tell something about ethical guidelines from the point of view from Forum Artis that has been making these guidelines these past some years. And when we started, there was COVID pandemic going, so it was a bit slow start. But we published the guidelines in the end of February last year, and they were supposed to be about pilot year last year, and then we should finalize them. And that has also taken a little bit more time because now, as I always say, we have the whole ethical situation in this country is quite awful since we had this new government. And somehow I feel it's sometimes very tricky for me, difficult to just concentrate on guidelines in arts, ethical guidelines in arts, because I think that how people are treated in this country, if they are not very wealthy, it's unethical. But anyway, we are now talking about artistic guidelines, so let's concentrate on them. Myself, I've started to think that artistic freedom is even trickier question than I thought before. And somehow it sometimes has also to do with the question of safer space. And of course, we all like to have very safe place. There cannot be any discrimination or harassment. But sometimes I feel that people don't feel safe if somebody has an ugly opinion or an opinion they are not agreeing with or is monotonic. So we also have to learn to deal with those opinions, if they are only opinions or artistic forms, not as I said, discrimination or harassment or something that is illegal, of course. And so it's very important to talk about these things and think how we are dealing with them. I'm a very practical person. I like concrete examples, and I would like to give a little example about artistic freedom and how it can be tricky to deal with it. And it's about what happened last winter. We had this Lux Helsinki event, and there was a painter who made a painting of Sami people. She made other paintings too, but the Sami painting was very, it was the one we were discussing about. And I've been talking with her many times, with the artist. I've been talking with Helsinki Festival Foundation. And there were many it was very complicated thing because it affected on how people were thinking about Sami people and who is artist and who is educated and who belongs and where. But if we talk about the painting and what happened was that she had a very good idea to reflect discriminated and colonized people and on the walls of power to show how they were treated. But from my point of view, she didn't have all these answers ready. And then some people thought that she was diminishing Sami people, or she didn't understand them, that she was exploiting them. And they were, for example, so little things about that the outfit was not original, and there are no mountains in Finland. Well, I was in Lapland 1 week after this, in January 1 week to talk about ethical things with Sami people and those, and then one very respected person there, I don't want to say the name, but she is very respected person. She showed me a picture of this outfit, and it was from Norway, and the picture was from Norway, and there are no mountains in Norway, not in Finland. What I want to say with this is that when we get angry, we should maybe investigate a little, and of course the artist should have explained it maybe a little bit more. And the thing went on, and she got some kind of decision. It was maybe what was in July or June, where the organization apologized for what happened because they had these content warnings and stuff like that. And from my point of view, I had one very nice moment when I was talking with the organization. They said that maybe if they had read the ethical guidelines, they would have dealt a bit different with this case. And that made me, of course, very happy. But if we think what the painter could have done, otherwise maybe she could have realized that this is very difficult topic, and as I said, have answers ready and maybe discuss more with Sami people how to come out with that. But as I said, there are so many sides of this, and in this world with social media being so active, it happens very quickly that you are really there is this judgment comes so quickly that then you are too late to explain anything. And what was very sad in this case was that it was for some people a reason to blame Sami people for being too fragile or too sensitive or something, and that made me, of course, very, very sad. So that's why I think it would be very important for us always to think if we do art or have it somewhere and we know it's a bit how do I say, dangerous or sensitive subject, that we really make the background work very good and have the answers ready when it happens. Because this, as I said, social media is so quick that it's like we have to be prepared. But anyway, if you have at this point something to ask, I'm happy to answer. We have some minutes before we, I think, should start with the panel.
Did I understood right that she was kind of refused to showcase the artwork? She wouldn't be able to show it. Did I understood right?
Well, they put this warning that was read aloud always when it was. They put it there, but it was like, and that was a violation for those authors' rights and everything. It was very, very complicated, but it was there. It was there.
They found some compromise.
Yeah, they put these warnings like this. Can somebody help with sisältövaroitus? Content warnings like that. Be careful and.
And was she Sami representative?
No. That was the problem, and she didn't have any. Well, she told that she was not Sami. But there is also this question that are we allowed to paint a picture of someone who is not like us? So it's, of course, there are so many questions always in these cases. Compromises, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to highlight that fine line there with appropriation. You need to, you can't just do it with something that you're unfamiliar with yourself. If you're going to make social commentary on it, there needs to be a deeper connection to the culture that you are speaking on behalf of. So is that what was part of the content warning? Was she aware of those fine lines?
Sorry, now I didn't. Do you mean that the artist should know more, or the people who comment?
There's a responsibility.
Yeah. But she claims that she had it. And she had shown the picture to Sami people who accepted it. But then, of course, there is this ongoing fight in Finland who are genuine Sami people. And that's another, I don't want to talk about it because I don't understand, but that's what's going on really hard. So there was also this discussion, who is allowed to give the Sami opinion? And these are very, very difficult questions, and I don't want to answer. And
Just wondering regarding indigenous cultures, if there are significant elders in the community who have that role, then they could be the speakers that could be contacted for such a thing. But I don't know if that's...
yes, of course, if they are accepted, but this really showed, because I don't know how much you are aware of, but there is this legislation going on with Sami and their this autonomy and how they should to deal with that. So it was mixed in this battle, that who is the Sami person who can comment this. And they started to fight with each other, and then we had this political party what was taking that all the Sami people are just crazy, and it really lied. It was an explosion, really, and that was very, very sad in this place.
But isn't it also the kind of form of the censorship? What she's supposed to say or express?
Yeah, it is, but
Ethical and technological.
yeah, that is, and that's very hard to.
Censorship.
Yeah, that's very hard to say who is right, how can you do it? I don't have any answers at all.
And where are those ethical rules?
What do you mean?
Ethical rules that they were supposed to follow. Is it the Helsinki festival?
I don't know if they had any. I mean, they were just, what happened was that one very active Sami people who was writing about this in Instagram, and then they get scared, and then it started. Like it was really there was no it wasn't like this. It was coming from different angles. Yeah, and like yes.
Do you know if after this experience there was set in place some sort of I don't know, committee or rules or follow-up of this incident, just thinking for the future of the festival?
I don't know. What he said when we're talking, that they are going to do something about it, but I haven't followed up now in detail what has happened, because they were also sued by this artist, so they had to deal with that first. And apology, yeah. Okay, is there something else, or shall we move on to our panel? Okay, may I invite to the stage Sebi Dehraha, Kristine Langinauer, and Kalle Korhonen. Thank you. Let's start with formal introduction, and then you can do the self-description, please, after that. Sebi Dehraha is a multidisciplinary artist, researcher, and educator based in Helsinki. Through her practice, she actively investigates and questions the prevailing power structures, social norms, and conventions while focusing on womanhood, storytelling, and everyday life and resistances. And at best, to initiate methods with contemporary art to create space for dialogue. Currently, she is pursuing her doctoral studies in contemporary art at Aalto University. Her research interests include matters of representation, collaboration as practice, decolonization, and feminist politics. Christine Langenauer is a curator, writer, and researcher focused on situational knowledge, feminist and norm-critical thinking. She has curated exhibitions at Vantaa Art Museum Artsi, among other art venues. She's worked as Culture for All, promoting accessibility and diversity in the arts, and was the acting executive director of the Pro Artibus Art Foundation from 2014 to 2015. And Kalle Korhonen is the director of funding at Kone Foundation, a grant-making foundation based in Helsinki. He has been active at the foundation since 2012, starting as a research funding specialist, and is currently responsible for all the grants awarded by Kone Foundation. Kalle's background is in the intersection between classical Greek and Latin philology and ancient history. And then we start with the questions. Sebide Raha, in your artistic practice and research, you work with questions of power structures, social norms, and representation, among others. How do these power structures, in your opinion, influence artistic freedoms in Finland?
Thank you for the question. Also, before that, maybe I can talk about my description. Yes. I'm a woman in her 40s with dark hair, with a small pony in the back, and with white shirt and then pants, sitting here.
Thank you.
This is a good question, and I come from, maybe I can speak a little bit about my positionality, both as an artist and a person who has worked with different organizations to do advocacy for the right of foreign, so-called, I don't like to use this terminology, but so-called foreign-born artists and cultural workers in Finland since 2015, both as initiative called Third Space Gallery, which was actually developed and established as a place where different practices and different artists with diverse background could not find any place in the mainstream art scene in Finland. Unfortunately, still the situation hasn't improved too much, but it's much better than what it was 12 years ago. And what I can say about the structures, based on several research and actually extensive works in the past few years, it has become very clear there is certain attitude in the art scene in Finland. I can speak about that for sure. But before that, I would like to talk about freedom. In general, in my opinion, freedom is a very relative concept. We can never achieve it fully, or if we think, it's a very simplistic way of thinking that freedom, here we have absolute freedom and elsewhere we don't have any kind of freedom. And considering this matter, I would think that there are several matters structurally in Finnish art scene that avoid artists to be themselves, to express what they want to express. And in my opinion, sadly, artists are not really free here, depending on their way of expression, their practices, and also what they want to say. And one of them that I can touch is the normalities and what are the norms in Finnish art scene. Whose practice? I would like to pose like questions here because yes, I have my own response to this question, but also I would like to, for us to think about it, whose practices is good enough to be exposed in the Finnish art scene? Who can have imagination? Who can imagine truly the way they can? And what kind of imaginations are considered artistically and what kind are not really considered? Because we think about like colonialism or whatever in the past tense, but unfortunately, art world in general, and also in this geography that we are today, is not exception of that. The way we think, what is called art, what is called a good art, and what is called not at all worthy of being an artistic practice. I think this is really important, and this is where the problem starts, because in the art scene we see that there are certain narratives being told. Like what example that you brought, it is not, in my opinion, it is not about who speaks on behalf of who, but it is how and from which positionality we bring those narratives to the force. I mean, these artists would not be questioned if there was some sort of collaboration, in my opinion, or cooperation, seeking advice from somebody who comes from that certain community. You know, it doesn't need to be, certainly, if I'm an Iranian, a person doesn't need to be necessarily Iranian to speak on behalf of Iranian political situation, in my opinion. But it is about how and from what positionality we speak about those truths that artist wants to understand or brings question or provoke those notions. I think this narrative and the way the narratives are selected and how they are expressed is a big problem in Finnish art scene. I'm not hesitant. I'm very known about that, being controversially talking about the issues. As I understand, it's not only about art scene. I think massively the problem originates from art education in the universities and art departments, actually. I personally faced a lot of issues. In one case, I was also going to the direction that I was deprived from my freedom of expression, and I needed to bring to the legal team, like lawyers of the institute, that I am actually entitled to freedom of expression based on Finnish law, because I was aware, because of my own activities, that I have freedom of expression. But one can easily drop to that situation that you are deprived. But what comes to my mind also, besides the narrative, which is a very important question at stake when it comes to freedom of expression, one other matter is ostracism. Sadly, I can talk about my own observation. I'm very much connected to so many people in the arts scene, at least in Helsinki, and other cities, very little, that many artists, because of the way they are bringing up their ideas or their imaginative stories, they are not even included. And if there is a few years, that is understandable, they can resist, but the problem is that in long term, 10 years, how can an artist resist without having any financial support to go forward? I mean, this definitely affects the livelihood of an artist. It definitely affects their way of expression, and then the way because they have to compromise certain things that they don't wish to compromise. Like the problematic with narrative, for instance, is the victimhood narrative, which is very much cherished, you know, not only in Finland, but in global way, particularly in West, there is this very much tendency that victimhood narrative, that somebody comes from certain background who was victim in certain circumstances, should come and express they are given freedom of expression to come and express. In that way, I don't see, if the artist wants to express that, it's not a problem, but when these certain persons are put in that direction for 2 decades, you know, I came across to several artists in Finland who come from diverse backgrounds, and they told me that, can you believe it, still I'm called refugee? But it is very problematic. So once upon a time, a person who has been a refugee or asylum seeker came to this country, but they are still expect from the art institution to express themselves in their practice only in that narrative. I think this is a very big problem, and it really prevents the freedom from the artists in their career. But ostracism that I talk about is that if you open up your mouth and talk too much and you don't have the structure that can support you, the support structure, so-called support structure, you can be excluded from everywhere, from communities, from art institutions. It's very easily to happen. So maybe in the next question we can touch like how can we tackle this issue, because that is one of the extremist cases that I came across by talking to several people, that they were excluded because of the way they expressed their opinion or they criticized the certain structure. I can't say more, but
okay,
maybe
yes,
I'm good.
Thank you very much. Very sad to hear some of these, but very important remarks. And then I would like to ask Kalle, from your perspective as a funding director at the Kone Foundation, how do you see funding bodies influencing the boundaries of censorship in artistic practice? Can you provide examples of how financial support can enable artistic expression and artistic freedom?
Well, to start with a self-description, I'm a middle-aged white male person with glasses and a salt and pepper hair and beard. So I'm starting with a more general sort of point, and then we'll come back to more detail in the next questions. But if we start from the dictionary meaning of censorship, so it often refers to obscene, politically unacceptable things or threats to security. Now, there are many kinds of funding bodies, but at least in Finland, both the public and the private funders have so far emphasized, at least in principle, the significance of artistic freedom. So, but anyway, the threats are that this, of course, it is possible that this could change, for example, in the public funding with more extremist values present in the government, like Hanna mentioned already. Well, she didn't say extremist. So, and if there's hostility towards artists and artistic work among the general public, this might affect the private funders too. And then another threat, of course, is the so-called group thinking or self-censorship, when artists begin to think in certain ways because they think that the rest of the artistic community thinks the same way. And this is a problem that will never go away. So some kind of group pressure will be present as long as there are humans or comparable species on this planet. So anyway, a grant request or application for funding is never awarded directly. As you know, there's always a consideration of some kind. So it is essential to encourage those who evaluate and make the funding decisions to walk the talk and not just declare that we are funding courageous work or whatever the term we are using, to think independently. And then in a later, once a funding decision is made, so a private funder should try to protect its grantees against different forms of censorship, or at least try to help its artist grantees if they encounter censorship, whatever the source is. Yes.
Thank you very much. Christine, as an independent curator, how do you see power dynamics within institutions shape the presentation of controversial artworks? Can you share any specific instances where you had to navigate these dynamics?
Thank you for the question, and hello to everybody. I will do a short description as well. I'm a 42-year-old white woman with reddish hair just below my shoulder. I have pink lipstick today, I have greenish eyes, I have a black dress with flowers and boots that are black with flowers as well. And I think, first of all, that this is a very important question to raise. I think, Sepida, you touched upon this already in your answer. And I think this is quite hard also to kind of point out what are the power dynamics in place and how do they work. But I think this is something that institutions should think about and be aware. And I think that happens usually when we have the norms we work with, and then something goes against it, there's friction, and then they become more visible. I think this is especially important to think about when we work in Finland, which has a very small art scene, and we have a very few art institutions and museums and few people working in them, so they have a lot of power, a lot of say who gets visibility and who doesn't. And there comes all these questions to play that you, Sepida, raised. And I forgot to mention that, as Hanna said, I'm not working for an institution at the moment, so I'm not representing an institution. This is my perspective on things as a person who has worked in different institutions within the metropolitan area of Helsinki, so I don't know that much what goes on perhaps in other cities in Finland. I think in Finland, when we think about censorship, we don't have situations where somebody would come and seize artworks from museum exhibitions. That happened some decades ago in Finland. Nowadays, it's more about, if there's controversy, there's maybe content warnings that Hanna talked about already. And I think this is due to the fact that before something is put on display in museum exhibitions, there's already a long process before that that goes on usually for years. And then there's different instances within that process where curators and museum workers and other things can either influence or be part of choosing what is put on display and how. And this makes it quite opaque, and we should make it more transparent. And I think one good way of thinking about it is to think about what is presented and what is not shown. And be aware of that, and at the same time think about who is working in this institution and who is not, who gets kind of a say in decision making. And I think, like Sepide, you said, there's already who gets to be part of this process in the beginning. And all those kind of things that put in place before something is put out in the exhibition. One thing, of course, that influences is resources such as money and time, and where you get your funding from. Is it from the state? Is it from the municipality, or maybe the city? Is it from funding outside, from private foundations, for example? Usually it's a mix of many of these things, and usually you can get funding for specific things, which leaves other things outside. And then a museum context is very static. We have usually walls, and we have structures that we work within, and everything that doesn't fit into that is more easy to kind of forget. And time is of essence, because in museums you have to work efficient, as in everywhere else in our society today, which means that sometimes you cut corners. Because of that, you choose to work with somebody you worked before because you know it's a smooth process, for example, and then maybe you don't have time to look around for something else, for example, or you don't even know where to look to find something else. And then values is something that most museums, for example, now have, and you can go on their website and you can read there. But I think there's always a gap between what is said and written and what is done, and how that is reflected upon. I tried to think about some good examples where the content kind of was controversial, and we had to really think about how to present it in somehow. But most of the time, it's been more about materials and that are, for example, organic, and it's hard to present those in museum environment or something like that, or maybe tekijänoikeus. Copyright questions, or these kind of things. But I would like to mention an exhibition I did in Artis with Jussi Koitela a few years back called Secured, Politics of Bodies and Space, where we actually tried to address kind of like the museum space and what is seen as valuable in a museum space, or who. And the idea was kind of that in museums we want to preserve things. We want to preserve the museum as a space, but also usually items that are in there, and we work a lot to ensure that nobody can touch them, for example, or how you walk in there or something like that. But who is kind of seen as a threat, who can feel welcome, for example, in a museum space? Do we expect people to have some kind of knowledge before they enter a space? and all these kind of things, just to kind of also make ourselves aware of these things, because I think that's from where we start from, but we do have a long way to go.
Thank you very much. Then we have another round of questions, and maybe quite not too short, but not too long answers, so we can go through all. Sebide again. Despite the fact that artists don't face persecution in Finland for production of controversial artworks, the field of art and culture is still extremely restrictive. There are various ways through which artists can be silenced and censored, indirectly, for example, with cuts to their funding. What would be your advice to those artists who face the lack of financial support? How can they possibly stay true to their artistic vision?
Really difficult.
Very easy question.
Not at all. It's not really easy. How can I myself give advice to others? But maybe I can share something, because I have been in that position that I was not really receiving funding, and being non-European, non-white, living in this country with all the stereotypical perception of the other that I faced, from bus stop to the bank, simply making a deposit in a bank account and asking me to bring a Finnish husband or a boyfriend there to make a deposit, that in my entire life as a woman never faced that, asking a man coming for me to make a deposit, that I faced in Finland. These are like just some example. Like, I'm sure I am thankful that some others never faced this kind of situation in Finland. I hope they don't. But what I can share is that what helped me the most was to be outspoken and have a community, even 5 people that I could receive support. With that case that I spoke, that I cannot unfortunately openly talk about that, 2 years it took that case. I received justice in the end with my own resistance, but I was left alone. And I think what helped me to be outspoken and seek justice and to seek for my freedom of expression in Finnish context in the art scene was that I had a community whom I could share, who they could give me advice, they could share their own contact and network that I could seek. I think the most important thing is the self-resilience, and also to have the community to receive support. Otherwise, unfortunately, many artists quit, many artists leave, many artists cannot anymore be themselves, they compromise everything, I think self-censorship is a very common matter in the art scene in general, and Finland is not an exception on that case. But regarding funding, what I find very truthfully helpful to share information, to support one another. If somebody is in a good position and trusted as an artist, can support other artists by providing recommendation letters, sharing reading application. I think this is one thing that I did as a person in Finnish art scene when I succeeded to receive support. It took 5 years, but I managed more or less to do that. But these are things that I can say, but also I want to talk about like what you take from what you said about this normative that it's easy to work with people whom we already know. I think this is the most challenging, how to find also what I came across when I was thinking of what is the issue, why certain art practices or certain artists are never invited, is that they are unknown. So I think we can't ask the solution from the artists who are already in the precarious and vulnerable situation. But what we can do is to enhance the situation with guidelines, with policy making. These are true change making in the higher level. And institutions need to take responsibility. How can we ask an artist who is doing multiple different irrelevant jobs, also they have integrity enough to do their practice in some hours in the midnight or whenever they can. This is the reality I am witnessing around my community, different communities that I remember how different, not only my friends, but different colleagues are navigating in the art scene here. And with the budget cut, it is going to become more. This situation will become even harder. Who can be an artist? Who can go forward? I don't want to just be, I want to be realistic, but I also want to have hope. I think supporting one another is a good thing, but also in higher level, I believe that the institution need to, if they don't want to do that, then the higher up, maybe like policymakers can bring this kind of normative that you need to have this, follow this guideline for the change to happen and people can be included. But in practice is that there is not too much funding in a sense to cover all the artists all around the country. But it's not only about money, it's about that how people can express themselves even in alternative ways. Finding different spaces. Even what we found is to establish an alternative space, third space. It was a small 2 and 3 meters. For 8 years we navigated. Over 600 artists and cultural workers came and expressed themselves in that small space. It's about how one can carry on, and there are solutions on that. Finland is not the only place. There are other countries that artists are finding different ways. Even I want to say the previous panel, they were talking about how the places that there are totalitarian, those countries. Actually, I want to say in those countries, artists are very smart and they find their ways to express themselves and bring some sort of unity. I come from Iran, and to be honest, last year art played such a big role in the current situation in Iran, women life freedom, and I want to say that actually art is very strong. That sometimes I feel here we don't have that kind of a sense. What are we doing as artists in here? I think there are pros and cons in different circumstances and situations, socially and geographically and politically. It's very hard to compare. Yes, there are persecutions in different places. It's super sad. It's really horrible. But also we have other kind of situation here, which is very sad. So my answer to your question is that to have a support structure that artists can find among their community, family members, friends, and also institutions can create those kind of situation. And above that, the policy making and funders such as Kone and others can play a really significant role in supporting unlikely kind of press expressions and contents, which Kone has been supporting. I have been following up, supporting certain contexts that other funders would never support or Taike would never look at it. I think one big problem also in regard to this is that what I said, the first question, whose art is considered art? I think this starts from art education situation, but it goes to Taike and other places. Those people who are in the committees, what they see valuable as artistic practice to support, then always certain practices are out. Oh, this is too political, we don't want to support. But what is politics? How we can, even the stance that one can take and say, oh, but we don't think about politics, that is a political stance. Yeah. So this comes from being unaware, like how politics affects one in a way and others in another way. You are advantage and the other one is disadvantage. I think this is how I see.
Thank you very much. Very good points you made. Kalle, how do the power dynamics between artists and funding bodies affect the types of projects that get funded? What measures can be taken to ensure that the power dynamics between artists and funding bodies don't lead to self-censorship?
Well, in our case, we are using peer review, so like most other funders, I guess. So then it's other artists who decide on which artist applicants will be receiving grants. And just like Sepide just said, that they are sort of defining the borders of what is defined as art, for example, in Finland, and what is not, or what is defined as something that deserves a grant. Not exactly maybe what is art, but then what kind of art deserves a grant. And in our case, it really comes down to the evaluator. So it actually and really comes down to them. So the peer reviewers, I mean. Although the board makes the decisions, the evaluators certainly have a central role in the proposal. We are not sort of, we are not in our art funding, we are not in a situation in which the board would then sort of find something totally different or sort of step over the evaluators and so on. The evaluators really have a role in Kone Foundation art funding. Now, and of course, there could be generational gaps between the reviewers or evaluators and the grant applicants. Those are things that we have to address somehow. Well, maybe one of the eternal issues in art funding is how the artists treat each other in artistic projects. If, for example, bodily harm or mental harm is involved, then it can be a fine line between censorship and protecting participants from harm, protecting other artists from harm caused by others. So in such cases, maybe the artists may feel that artistic freedom is compromised if they think or if they find out that the application has been rejected because of such issues. There was one example I could I mentioned, but otherwise, well, if, for example, there was some discussion between, when I asked questions, I asked the organizers of this panel to sort of clarify some of the questions here. There were mentions that somebody had sort of chosen to self-censor themselves and not submitted something to Kone Foundation, because they thought that Kone Foundation would never fund it. So please don't do that. So please, because then in those cases we can never know that there were some ideas that were omitted from the application. If, for example, if an application contains controversial ideas, you won't get punished, but you might get rejected. Maybe not because of controversial ideas, but because of other motivations.
May I just say it returns to the ostracism that I spoke about, like it's among the artists, the community of artists, not really like cultural workers. As far as I understand, many artists avoid because they are afraid. For instance, Kone or Suomen Kulttuuri Rahasto's like organization or institute, they will become ostracized, and if they bring this idea, Kone will never ever, they will remember it and they will never get funding. This is very common actually. It's really good that you mentioned
and
it.
And if I can sort of correct this impression, because our evaluators change every year. They don't see the previous applications by different applicants, and of course we don't have a blacklist of people or ideas or
thank you for that.
that we would sort of remember and keep in our somewhere.
But this doesn't come from imagination. This is what the personal encounter with some institute and some cultural workers happen. That's why they think Kone and other bodies, funder bodies, might be similar. Mm-hmm. You know, because it is coming from reality. It's not really imaginative in the sense that they feel that way.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, we have the problem of a very low acceptance rate. And this can, of course, lead to people thinking that we have something that they don't want to fund, that we have some characteristics that they don't want to fund. But, of course, it's a false impression because then it comes down to the low acceptance rate.
Thank you. Christine, you previously worked for a major public institution, the Vantaa Art Museum Artis. Were you, as a curator, expected to incorporate any sort of ethical guidelines into your curatorial practices?
In short, yes. But it's more complicated than a simple yes. Most public art museums, at least in Finland, are part of ICOM, International Council of Museums, which has a code of ethics for museums. As you can see, it's very short, so it's very general. You can find it online in many languages as well, but it sort of gives the basis. And then in Artsi that you referred to, we also had safer space guidelines, for example, which we worked on together with the whole museum personnel, because the idea was, of course, that this and all kinds of guidelines, they can be just words on paper, and if you don't implement them or feel that they are important, then you don't work with them. And then I worked with artists who had, for example, these writers, where they expressed how they want things to work, or in what kind of communication they, for example, wanted, or all these kind of things, which of course for me as a curator and as the personnel at the museum, that was a gift sort of, because it also gave us guidelines how this person in particular has wishes to work with us. And then in Finland, according to law, every workplace which has more than 30 people working there has to make an equality plan. But again, it's just a piece of paper if you don't use it and implement it. So there's a lot of kind of levels of ethical guidelines. But I think, and most museums have them, and I think working in the arts and cultural field, I think also more and more artists are calling us out if we are doing things that are not ethical. But at the same time, I think what Sepida said about this stamp that you get also, it's complicated, of course, because as there are so few places to exhibit, especially in a museum environment, there's very few artists who get with funding. But I do think that there is that you can get kind of a stamp that you maybe are too political or not political in the right way, or then you wish that this person always worked with these kind of issues, for example, these kind of things, or you kind of have these, you tick boxes. Okay, I have an artist who is Sami, I have an artist who comes from a certain area in the world, or works with a certain issue or something like that. So it can also become quite simplistic, like only ticking the boxes. I think art institutions have changed in the last decade or so, how we work also. There's been some controversies that have highlighted, for example, the colonialization of museums. And museum workers are more and more aware of these things all the time. And there have been initiatives like the Helsinki Art Institutions for Equality, for example, who have made strategies to kind of fight these kind of things. There are, Culture for All has made an accessibility and diversity checklist for museums which can be used. So there are these kind of things. But I think one thing that characterizes the Finnish art scene is that museums don't take many risks. They don't really like to take risks. And there is also, of course, the pressure from getting income from tickets, for example, or catering to politicians who work in the municipality or the city, for example, or the state, not directly, but indirectly usually. And then the norms, which we talked about already, which usually are things that people don't even maybe think about so much, but they are always at play.
Thank you very much. Then I have questions to you all, and now I would like to change a little bit your rules. Only 2 minutes per each, because we would like to have some time for the questions from the audience. So the questions are, what are your hopes for the future in terms of the relationship between artistic freedom and institutional boundaries? How can the art community leverage its collective power to bring about change in terms of censorship and support for diverse artistic practices? And maybe Christine, you can start for the change.
Well, I hope that first of all, I hope that, artists continue to challenge and push institutions. also because they are very curious about new technique, new materials, and they tackle issues that are very hard and sometimes invisible in the society. And museums, again, are quite static institutions, but I think we need the push to kind of always evolve and try to think how we can kind of come together somewhere. So a very active dialogue. I have to say I'm a bit worried with the cuts now, that this will make museums take less risks. And of course, our field is already very competitive. So we are always fighting for space, we are fighting for time, resources, funding, audience, and of course, cutting the funds will most likely make it even worse. However, I am hopeful that also this can bring us together. Like now, today, there is this Arts Against Cuts, which are organizing this march for the arts tonight at 7 o'clock. If you're interested to come, it starts at the Rautatieasema. And so I think we need more different kind of initiatives. And we have come together before. There was Checkpoint Helsinki 10 years ago, and these kind of different things that the art scene has come together to fight something or fight for something together. However, I think that institutions should be more proactive, and I think what we are lacking in Finland is this kind of institutions and people working in these institutions taking publicly stances and taking part publicly in the political debate, and kind of make the great audience and also the political level aware of what it is about, and kind of now the narrative is very much that art can be cut first or it's not so important. So I think this is something that especially the people in the institution should do more. We should take part of the public debate and stand up for things.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Kalle next, if you wish.
Yeah, just like Christina said, so the cuts in public funding might lead to diminished courage or boldness and more security-oriented thinking. So that is more responsibility for the private funders who don't expect you to bring in profit from the sales of artworks or tickets. But then also, and I'm repeating, and this sounds very boring, but very much it comes down to the selection of evaluators and their choices. So there we have introduced in order to avoid sort of being trapped in our own bubble, we have introduced the possibility that people can, through an online form, can propose evaluators and propose themselves, for example, as evaluators or other people as evaluators. So I think that's the answer from our side.
Thank you. That was very effective. And Sebida.
Yes, just I want to say about what you said about equality plan. I had my right notebook with me. I just want to say Avo's report that Kopore did in collaboration with Global Art Point as one of the very good institutions who is following up with what is the situation widely in the Finnish art scene. From 86 cultural institutions which responded to the survey that Kopore shared with them, 67% did not have a quality plan. I mean, just realistically thinking, what kind of situation we are facing? Institutions who have number of the, what you said, above 30 workers, they don't have the equality plan. I mean, just to keep it realistically, I share a lot of worries, as you mentioned. Definitely the cuts will make situation worse. Friends and colleagues will become competitors more than ever, and there will be more desperation. despair, the feeling of despair in the art scene. I definitely believe that we should join forces together, as you said, an institution with all the power and the funding and whatever they have resources, they should also take a role and stop being neutral. There is no such a thing as neutrality in art scene nowhere in the world. All art institutions are complicit in political manner. And my hope, I have many hopes, but I think maybe, I don't know, to join forces is my hope, and not to be silent, because already with keeping silent, nothing is changing. I mean, being loud enough that our voice is being heard, like the case at Kiasma, like how artists unitedly managed to accomplish something meaningfully in consideration of the horrors that are happening in our time here. I think it's very important. I believe that art is not powerless. So are the artists, but they need to have support system in order to resist against all these horrible changes. And the politics is the worst, because certain people from certain positionality, they are more deprived than the others, as you mentioned with the government. Because artists is not just artists, they are first a human being, and they have needs, and they need to meet those needs daily life in order to be artists to express. So my hope is that the circumstances with every individual vote can change in a better way. I don't know, it might be not realistic, but whatever.
Thank you for this, and it's very important to talk about this thing that we are so silent, but we are now organizing, or Forum Artis is going to coordinate happening on October 1st, that we will do something against these cuts, or express our opinion. It's called Art Stop. We were talking about strike, that we would like to have the whole country somehow not maybe cancel everything, but anyway talk about it, that all this is in danger. And we will know by the end of September what cuts they are planning, so we will address them. Of course, we are a bit late concerning next year, but unfortunately these cuts are not planned only for next year. So we will, but you will know more about it through Globe Art Point or your organization. So we are now planning on that. So we are going to stop being silent, I hope.
Yes, hopefully.
But thank you everybody for a very interesting conversation on an important topic. And I would like to open the floor for questions if you have any, and you can raise your hand and have the microphone. And if we have some questions online, we have promised to also take them in condition. So please.
Yep, thank you. Actually, there is no question from the online audience. There is a question from me.
Okay, good.
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm the project manager at Globe Art Point. And I would like to pose a question to Kalle regarding the foundations and their role. You were saying that it is up to the people who are processing the applications to decide who is being funded and who is not. I was also wondering whether, well, in my opinion, it's also very important how you phrase the open calls and the applications, and who you encourage to apply and what types of projects you encourage to apply with. So my question was, do you have like annual reviews of these texts and these applications? Who decides what's in those applications? Because there is also the role of the foundation to kind of decide. It's ultimately about what is in that text before people apply, and then it's up to the people processing. Do you have some kind of like irregular reviews of these texts?
So do you mean a data analysis of the application work plans, or what?
Yeah,
or
like
what texts? Our funding calls?
Yeah, the calls. So who writes these calls, and who decides what kind of guidelines and what kind of wording is in there?
Yeah, well, that's something that we do at the foundation. The people personnel of the foundation. We write the calls, of course, then we discuss the descriptions with the board, or the board is informed of how the calls are formulated. Yes, but then yeah, then the instructions are reread and rewritten every year. But there's of course always a lot which we might change, but there's some path dependency there too. So yeah. There's that kind of analysis, but not a real data analysis. Yeah.
Thank you. I will pass the microphone. After that, we have one question from the basket.
Okay, hello, my name is Hanna, and I'm just still a few days the managing director of Global Point, and I would like to thank Alex for the question, because what we did with Oulu 2026, so we did review their the applications, the questions into their applications and so forth, together with Culture for All. And that, I guess, was a really eye-opener for Oulu 2026. So I warmly recommend that these calls and so forth are also reviewed by the other eye. Thank you.
Can I just add that, yes, we collect feedback on the application round from the applicants. That's how we sort of try to check that the texts are relevant for the applicants.
Because it wasn't that the issue with the BOLD initiative that Kone changed it actually a few years ago? So there were some criticism, right, towards the BOLD initiative.
Well, there's always a lot of criticism towards Kone Foundation, and it's very understandable. And I mean, well, that was it was not. Maybe that was one reason why the BOLD initiative rhetoric was changed towards artistic and academic freedom. People felt that it sort of was exclusive and elitist maybe, and then people felt that if they did not receive funding from Kone Foundation, they were not considered as bold or something like that. And it's perfectly understandable. And therefore now we have moved towards a more open formulation.
That's
good. Okay, this question I guess is for everyone. What is the difference between being selected or omitted and being censored? Can we always know or collaborate in this without even being conscious about it?
Maybe I can go, because I was the one who was talking so much about not being excluded. I think not being selected is like in certain circumstances one is not selected. But if systematically for a long time certain practices, certain people, certain content are excluded, what does it mean? Can we consider it as something like, justify it as something that is randomly not being selected, or is it a systematic matter? We know for sure with all the worldwide research and work that there are structures in place that systematically exclude certain content, certain people, certain expression. So this is my understanding of that. If it's one circumstances or a few, this is understandable. But if it's in long term, certain people, certain practices, certain expressions are excluded, that means structurally that they are discriminated.
Okay, thank you.
But Nina, you can go ahead if you want to add or Kalle.
Do you have something? So it was what's the difference between being selected or
discriminated?
Or discriminated.
How we can know one is not just selected.
Yeah, it says selected/omitted.
Yeah, it's very hard kind of to draw lines, I think. Okay, somebody is selected, yes, but we don't know what the process behind there was and who maybe was there also considered. But I think you have a very good point, because if there's always something that we don't see, then that means something. And I think then we can look at what is shown So we have certain practices that are, and certain artists that get a lot of visibility, and then we have those who don't. And I think, for example, associations like Globe Art Point are then very, or Kettuki, for example, and other instances are very important to also work with institutions to become aware of these norms and biases they have. And also think about the notion, what is art practice, and how do we display it? So, yeah, I don't know if this was an answer. But
Yes, it was.
If it's okay, I will pass the mic now for the last question. Tatiana.
Hello, I'm Tatiana Solyova, the independent producer and partly curator, and diversity agent and Global Point wise. But now I put the hat of the just curious person who is trying to find out what is the censorship in Finland. And regarding the previous panel, let's just imagine the political art field in Finland. It's very difficult for me. We know how Finnish people and art field to respect nature. It's very much about humor and about probably feministic and gender and LGBT issues. But what is political issue in Finland that will draw the line like it was in the previous discussion? They could make the music and shows and be very, very famous in Russia until they touched the political point, and that was the turning. And after that, they start to be illegal after this Navalny support, etc. Could you imagine that some artists in Finland will touch the point of the Finnish politics, of democracy values, of joining NATO and publicly manifest against it? Where is the Finnish political scene, art scene? I don't know. That's my question to you. Probably you're better informed about it.
How can you define who is Finnish and who is not Finnish? Are you talking about white people as Finnish?
Yeah, no, we're talking about the Finnish institution where the people who residing in Finland, residents on Finland. I'm not talking about ethnical. I mean, all of us, the Finnish residents. Now we're trying to fight the government politics of cutting. And we have to underline the importance of art and culture, but how can we do it publicly? Would it be some censorship, or what is possible to do or what is not? Especially in the militarization, because this is the question that bothers me most of all, that the world is getting more and more militarized. Could you answer, please?
Well, just to mention some examples, there has been a festival of political photography, for example, and now there have been important statements made by, for example, Annukka Vähäsöyrinki, on the funding of arts and culture, and then against militarization. Yes, it's a very sort of topical issue, and it's surprising how rapidly the sort of military enthusiasm has spread in Finland now, but there has been criticism at least from the research field. So I mean, yeah, those are some examples that I could think of.
I just want to think, like, how do we define censorship? Do we mean just censorship means that openly somebody is persecuted, or censorship means that structurally for long term certain content is not even being displayed? I see that as censorship, to be honest. And also what I experienced myself, witnessed is better word, was that self-censorship. You talk about nature and the value of nature, absolutely, in Finland and many other places that is a value, but many artists who do not relate to this topic, I talk about this witnessing, they have to define projects related to valuing nature, environmental matters, but this is not their concern even. I mean, how do we define this? In terms of surviving, I don't even question those practices myself because I relate more to artists who are struggling to survive. This is a very provocative and good question, but how do we see that? Isn't it some sort of censoring oneself fundamentally in order to survive, while the matters that you care are other things, but you have to do this in order to survive? I see this as definitely a censorship in a way.
But I also see the struggle of the Elokapina, for example.
Which Kone supported, right?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, Kone supported.
He's supporting.
Sometimes I question myself, would it be more significant aid for me to support Elokapina than to support the Finnish-born artists in Finland? Because they really manifest and they're trying to make change. They are radical. This is the key word. And who is radical in the Finnish field nowadays? I know, Hanna, we talk about manifesto. It's something that everything is quiet and silent until comes the cuts. And they were coming. Now is the real big cuts.
Okay, yes.
It's a rhetorical question. You don't have to.
Yeah, well, I think, Sepide, how you talked about censorship, I think this is how institutions work in Finland. And I think, as you said, institutions here prefer to be quite safe, so they don't want to venture too much into any direction.
Take sides, let's say.
Yeah, and also, like we talked about, they don't take political stance in the public debate, for example.
Unless certain circumstances, I would say, right? Like
Yeah.
what happened war in Ukraine, then we saw
Yes.
very good unity that every institution, my university was always, we are neutral, suddenly Aalto over the night took the stand. I am pro that. Please don't mistake me, but it was just one moment that all the institutions,
Yes.
which claim they are neutral, politically stood
Yes.
up, which is a good practice. But we expect this practice in climate justice as well, in other circumstances as well, but which we don't see openly.
Yes.
And can I just say briefly that I think everyone has a role to play. So we are not thinking that we would convert all our funding to fund Elokapina or Extinction Rebellion or environmental activists, because we think artists also have an important role to play. Researchers have their role to play, and this is why we do fund more sort of a pluralistic totality.
And that is very good.
Important.
Important. I don't see any raised hands. I thank you all very much. I thank Gab for invitation. It has been a pleasure to be here, and I thank you all for coming and listening. And let's fight together to keep arts in our lives and also human race alive on this earth. Have a very nice autumn and hope to see you soon somewhere.
Thank you so much, Hanna, Kale, Sepide, and Stine, for sharing and being open up about your experiences.
What?
Thank you for speaking up about your experiences and sharing.
You're very
Now we
welcome.
are going to have almost 1 hour break, during which I hope you can go out, stretch your legs, drink water, listen to your body, whatever you need. I think the organizers have shared a comprehensive list of restaurants nearby where you can have lunch. However, in this cafeteria, just here, we have a deal for you if you want to stay for lunch with us.